Welcome to the silent horror, where the dark whispers speak louder than words, and every shadow hides a story you won't be able to forget. I'm your name, your guide to the unseen, the forgotten, and the terrifyingly quiet. If you're ready to face what lurks in the silence, stay close. Because here, nothing is ever as it seems. You felt it, haven't you? That nagging pull deep inside, like something is calling to you. Something you can't explain, no matter how far you run. There's a house on the edge of town, and it's not just abandoned. It remembers you. It remembers me. And though we try to forget, the walls never let us go. At night, when the world is quiet, the house whispers. It speaks our names, reminds us of something lost, something we can't quite grasp. There's a story here, one buried deep in the shadows, and we can't escape it. The memories are frayed, but they are real. We are the ones who are trapped. And the house? It will never let us leave. Lena had always been drawn to things that others avoided. The abandoned, the forgotten, the places that had once been full of life and now sat in quiet decay. The old house on the edge of town was the latest in a long line of curiosities. It stood like a forgotten monument to time. Its once proud structure now crumbling under the weight of years and neglect. Everyone in the town knew about it, but no one spoke of it. It was a place you didn't visit, a place you didn't mention. It was cursed. It had been abandoned for decades after the mysterious disappearance of the woman who lived there, Eleanor Hargrove. The stories surrounding her were a tangled mess of whispers. She was a recluse, they said. Some claimed she'd gone mad. Others said she'd made a deal with something dark, something that claimed her in the dead of night. The last anyone saw of her was a frantic letter, which was never delivered. It was burned, they said, along with any trace of her existence. But despite the town's warnings, Lena couldn't stay away. She wasn't like the others. There was something about the house that called to her, an almost magnetic pull. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a need. She had to see it for herself. The house was much larger than it appeared from the outside, its sprawling shape swallowed by overgrown ivy and tangled weeds. As Lena approached, she could feel the weight of the silence pressing against her, as if the world around her had paused. There was no sound except for the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the faint murmur of her own breath. The door was boarded up as expected, but there was a narrow crack near the hinges where the wood had warped. She hesitated for only a moment before she pushed her shoulder against it. The old wood creaking as it gave way with a reluctant groan. The air inside was thick, musty with the smell of rot and neglect. The house felt different, not just abandoned. There was something alive here, something ancient, something that watched her every movement. The floorboards beneath her feet groaned as she stepped deeper into the darkness. Dust swirled and the weak light filtered into the boarded windows, casting everything in a sickly sepia-toned haze. Lena's flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing strange remnants of a life long gone. Faded portraits hanging crookedly on the walls, furniture covered in thick layers of dust, and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling like broken promises. It was as if the house had been frozen in time, suspended between the past and something far darker. The air grew colder as she moved further into the house, and the silence pressing on her like a suffocating weight. She found herself in what appeared to be the living room. The furniture here was oddly arranged, chairs facing each other, as if in mid-conversation, but the room had an oppressive emptiness, like a gathering that had been abandoned long ago. There was an old fireplace along the far wall, its hearth long cold, the remnants of a once joyous fire now nothing more than scattered ashes. On the mantel, something strange caught her eye, an antique mirror. It was large, the frame carved in intricate designs that seemed to writhe, as if the patterns were shifting just out corner of her eye. She stepped closer, compelled by a force she didn't fully understand. As she peered into the mirror, she felt a strange sensation, a tingle across the back of her neck. She wasn't sure if it was a chill in the room or something else entirely, but her reflection didn't look right. For a brief moment, her face seemed distorted, like the edges of her features were blurring, melting. Her breath caught in her throat. The image flickered, and she gasped. The reflection of the room behind her was no longer empty. A figure stood there, a woman, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to burn with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Lena spun around, her heart pounding in her chest, but the room was empty. The mirror was just a mirror, the faint reflection of dust and decay. Her pulse quickened. It had been a trick of the light, or maybe the isolation was getting to her. She had to stay calm. She was just letting the stories get to her head. But the house was beginning to feel wrong. Too quiet, too still. She moved on deeper into the house, her footsteps echoing unervingly in the silence. The hallway stretched before her like an endless corridor, doors on either side, all closed, some with peeling paint, others with dark stains marring the wood. At the end of the hallway was a staircase leading up to the second floor, its banister rotting away in places, the steps creaking ominously with each step she took. Something in the air seemed to thicken, as if the very house itself was holding its breath. She reached the top of the stairs and found herself standing in front of a closed door. The light from her flashlight flickered, casting long, jittery shadows across the worn wooden floor. There was something familiar about this door. It wasn't like the others. It was as though it had been waiting for her to open it. With trembling hands, Lena turned the handle. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a room that seemed untouched by time. It was small, almost claustrophobic, with old furniture covered in sheets and an ancient rocking chair in the corner. But it wasn't the furniture that drew her attention. It was the walls. The walls were covered in strange, twisted symbols, drawn hastily with chalk or paint. Some were faded, others barely legible, but all of them seemed to pulse with an energy that was almost alive. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer to inspect them. She felt the distinct sense that someone who'd been trapped in this room was trying to tell her something. She was just beginning to decipher the symbols when she heard it. A sound, a whisper. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rushing of her own heartbeat. But it was there. Lena, her blood ran cold. She wasn't alone. The voice was soft, almost gentle, yet full of something that made her skin crawl. It wasn't the wind or the creak of the old house settling. No, this was something different. Something that had been waiting for her. She spun around, her flashlight swinging wildly, but the room remained empty, still, silent. Lena, the whisper came again, louder this time, more insistent. It wasn't in her head. It was real. Lena stumbled backward, her mind racing. The door slammed shut behind her, as though the house itself had locked her in. The whispering continued, echoing through the room, surrounding her. Lena. It was like the very walls were speaking her name. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the whispers ceased. Silence. But the house wasn't silent anymore. It had a voice, and it was calling for her. Lena stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the silence in the room pressed in around her. The door behind her, which had slammed shut with an eerie finality, loomed like a dark omen. She reached out, her hand trembling, and twisted the knob. It didn't budge. She pulled harder, the cold metal biting into her palm. But still, the door remained stubbornly locked. She was trapped. Panic bubbled up inside her, but she swallowed it down, forcing herself to breathe slowly. Stay calm, she told herself. This is just part of the house. It's an old place, falling apart. Things get stuck. That's all. The whispering had stopped. The oppressive silence seemed even more suffocating in its absence. Lena looked around, her flashlight flicking over the room. The walls were covered in strange, almost cryptic symbols, but now they felt different, less like markings and more like a warning. Each symbol seemed to pulse, its lines bending as if alive, feeding off the air around her. Her eyes were drawn back to the rocking chair in the corner. It hadn't moved before, but now it was different. The chair sat still, but the longer Lena stared at it, the more certain she became that it wasn't just a house that had been waiting for her. She glanced around again, willing herself to focus. The room felt oppressive, claustrophobic, like it was closing in on her. And that whisper, it was still there, just beneath the surface of her thoughts, lingering like the shadow of a half-remembered dream. Lena, it was softer this time, almost as if the voice was coming from inside her own mind. But the more she tried to ignore it, the louder it became, louder until it was a near-constant buzz in her ears. Stop. Focus. Get out of here. She tried the door again, and this time, it opened with an unsettling ease. She stepped into the hallway, feeling the weight of the house's gaze pressing down on her. She had to leave. Something was wrong here. Something deeply wrong. But the question was, how? Her legs carried her down the hall of their own accord, guided by an instinct she didn't fully understand. She tried to convince herself she was just being paranoid, that the house was simply a relic of time, with creaky floors and old air. Yet in her chest, her heart hammered against her ribs, like it knew something she didn't. She made her way back to the staircase, but the moment her foot touched the first step, a sudden, cold draft swept through the hallway, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of something rotting. Her eyes flicked up to the top of the stairs, where the second floor loomed above her in darkness. There, barely visible in the dim light, was another door. She hadn't seen it before. It wasn't as grand as the others, but something about it called to her. Something in the way it sat so quietly at the end of the hall, as though waiting for her. Lena didn't want to go up there. Everything in her told her to leave, to run, to break free from this place. But there was a compulsion, a force pulling her toward that door. It was impossible to ignore. She climbed the stairs slowly, her breath fogging the air before her, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The house felt alive around her, the floorboards groaning in protest with each step. But it wasn't the house itself that frightened her now. It was a presence, the feeling that something unseen was waiting just beyond the reach of her sight, something that was aware of her, watching her every move. When she reached the door at the end of the hall, her hand hovered over the knob. A low hum filled her ears like static, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. She could feel the air thickening, growing heavier around her. Do you really want to do this? A voice inside her mind whispered. She jerked her hand back, startled. The voice had been so clear, so distinct, as though it came from her own mouth. But it hadn't been her. Not at all. This was something else. Something that had been living in this house for far longer than she had. With a shaky breath, Lena twisted the door handle. The door opened with a soft creak, and she stepped inside. The room was unlike the others. It was small, barely more than a closet, and yet it was furnished with unsettling precision. The walls were lined with shelves, some empty, others crammed with old books and yellow papers. There were stacks of what looked like journals, and in the center of the room stood a wooden chair. On the floor in front of it, a faded rug lay in a crumpled heap, as though someone had been dragged across it. Lena's eyes darted to a small table beside the chair, where an object lay covered in a black cloth. The cloth was thick, heavy, like it had been draped there to conceal something. Compelled by an unknown force, Lena reached out and pulled the cloth away. Her breath caught. It was a mirror, framed in dark wood, its surface blackened with age. But it wasn't just any mirror. The glass was cracked in several places, the fractures running like veins across its surface. The cracks seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light, as though something inside the mirror was stirring. "Don't look at it." The voice warned again, more urgent this time. But it was too late. Lena's reflection stared back at her, though it didn't feel like her. It wasn't her face. Not exactly. There was something wrong with it. Something wrong with her eyes. They seemed distant, hollow. The reflection of her face twisted, as though it was stretching, pulling, warping into something unrecognizable. Her heart stopped. The face in the mirror smiled. It wasn't a real smile, no. It was more of a sneer, like something was mocking her. The reflection's eyes, her eyes, shifted slowly until they locked onto hers. And then it spoke. "You remember?" Lena stumbled backward, her knees buckling as she fell to the floor. The mirror seemed to ripple, its surface distorting as though the world behind it was warping, twisting. The whisper grew louder, becoming a chorus of voices, all calling her name in unison. "You remember what you did." Her pulse hammered in her ears, her thoughts racing. What did she remember? What was happening? The voices grew louder, suffocating, until they filled her mind completely. Her vision blurred, her breath quickened. The house seemed to close in on her, pressing down, wrapping her in its cold embrace. With a cry, she turned and fled, tearing out of the room and back into the hallway. But as she ran, she could feel something chasing her, something that had always been there waiting, and it was closer now. Lena bolted down the hall, her footsteps echoing off the warped walls as she ran. Her heart thundered in her chest, and her breath came in ragged gasps. The whispering hadn't stopped. It followed her, a constant, insistent murmur that seemed to come from all around her. "Lena, help me, you know what you did." She wanted to scream. She wanted to claw at her own ears to block it out. But it wasn't just in her head. It was real. Real in a way that sent terror crawling up her spine. It was a voice, but not one that was familiar. It was a presence. Something ancient and cold, woven into the very fabric of the house. "Get out," she thought desperately. "Just leave." But the door downstairs, the one she'd entered through, had slammed shut behind her, and the house, with its creaking floors and oppressive air, had closed in around her like a trap. The walls seemed to hum with something just beneath the surface. It wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a prison, and she wasn't the only one here. She stumbled into the living room, the flashlight trembling in her hand. The dusty furniture loomed in the darkness. Strange shapes in the faint beam of light. The portraits on the walls, the same ones she'd seen earlier, seemed different now, as if they, too, were watching her. Lena's pulse quickened as her eyes darted to the far corner of the room. There, in the shadow, she thought she saw something move. She froze, straining to hear any sound, but all she could hear was a deafening rush of her own heartbeat. The room felt thick, suffocating. She swallowed, trying to force some calm into her mind, but it was no use. The whispers grew louder again, their tone more urgent, more desperate. "You're here, you have to remember." Her flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging her into total darkness. Panic surged inside her. She fumbled for the light, shaking the flashlight, praying it would work. But all she could hear was her breath, rapid and shallow. And then, in the pitch black, she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be her own. Lena froze, her mind racing. The footsteps weren't coming from above, where she had heard them earlier, but from behind her, the unmistakable sound of boots dragging across old wooden floors. Her skin prickled with a cold sweat. She wasn't alone. Her eyes darted to the corner again, where the shadows gathered thick and dark. There was something there, moving just beyond the reach of her sight. She could feel it, watching, waiting. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice cracking in the heavy silence. But no answer came. The air in the room seemed to grow even colder. She could see her breath now, thick and white in the darkness, a fog of fear that clouded her vision. The house felt alive, like it had a pulse, like it was breathing with her. The footsteps grew louder. She took a hesitant step back, her eyes never leaving the corner. She couldn't run. She didn't know where to go. The house had swallowed her whole, and there was nowhere to escape. But that thing, whatever it was, it had to be stopped. With a sudden surge of defiance, Lena lifted her foot and started walking toward the shadow in the corner, her hands trembling, her breath caught in her throat. The whispers were so loud now, she could barely think straight, their words pressing against her skull. You know what you did. You can't hide anymore. Her fingers brushed against the cold wall, and she stumbled back, gasping. There, in the shadow corner, was a figure, a woman. Her face was hidden, but the shape was unmistakable. Her silhouette was sharp, defined, with a presence that filled the room. The figure was standing just at the edge of the light, not quite in it, but close enough to feel its chill. Lena's heart pounded, and her breath caught in her chest. She couldn't move. Please? The woman's head turned, slowly, deliberately, as if it was waiting for Lena to notice. She couldn't see her face, but Lena could feel the way of her gaze, something cold and ancient, as if the very air of the room thickened under its scrutiny. The woman took a step forward, her movements slow, graceful, almost like she was gliding rather than walking. The whispers became louder, more insistent. The figure raised a hand, fingers outstretched toward Lena. Help me, the voice said again. It was the same voice from Whispers, the voice that had called her name. Lena's feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The woman's hand reached toward her, inching closer, until Lena could feel the brush of air against her skin. Then, in a single fluid motion, the figure stepped forward and Lena stumbled back, her hand reaching for something, anything, to steady herself. The woman's face, now illuminated in the flickering light of Lena's failing flashlight, was pale, almost sickly white. Her skin was taut, stretched in over sharp bones, and her eyes, oh God, her eyes were empty, hollow. There was nothing behind them, just darkness. You have to remember, the woman said, her voice a hollow echo. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a command. It was an ultimatum. Lena's mind spun, a hurricane of fragmented thoughts. What was this? Who was she? Why was she? The woman's lips parted in a twisted, painful smile, a rictus of bone and skin. And then she spoke again. You did this to me. The words rang through Lena's skull like a bell, reverberating, pounding in her ears. Lena staggered back again, her heart hammering in her chest, a feeling of vertigo overwhelming her. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, feeling like the very walls of the house were pressing in on her, suffocating her. You did this to me. The words echoed in her head, louder now. What had she done? The figure began to fade, her body flickering like a dying candle flame, leaving behind only an emptiness where she had been. The whispers followed, growing softer, but still there. You remember? The air around Lena thickened with the weight of the house's presence, heavy and thick, as though the walls themselves were closing in. The woman was gone. But the house, it was not finished with her. Lena's chest rose and fell with shallow, desperate breaths, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the dusty armchair beside her. The room had grown colder, the air thick with something unexplainable, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The shadows seemed darker now, as if they had grown more solid in the absence of light. The woman, the figure, had vanished as quickly as she had appeared, leaving Lena alone in the suffocating silence of the house. But the whispers remained soft and insistent, constantly ringing in her ears. You remember? You did this to me. Lena could feel the weight of those words, like a stone tied to her heart, dragging her further into a pit of confusion and dread. Who was the woman? And what did she mean by, "You did this to me"? What had Lena done? Her mind swirled with fragmented images, glimpses of memories, blurred and broken like a shattered mirror. She tried to grasp onto them, but they slipped away, always out of reach. She had no memory of the woman, no recollection of any wrongdoing, yet the feeling that something terrible had happened lingered, clawed at her insides. Focus, Lena. Think. She had to find out. She had to understand what was happening here, before whatever force controlled this house consumed her entirely. Her flashlight flickered again, casting long, jittery shadows across the room. Her eyes were drawn back to the corner where the woman had appeared, to the darkened space that seemed to pull at her, as though it held the answer she so desperately needed. With a deep breath, Lena stood, her legs weak beneath her. She had no choice now. She had to move forward, find the truth. The house would never let her leave until she did. She stepped into the hallway, the old floorboards groaning under her weight, the air still and oppressive. The house felt like a tomb, its silence suffocating, its darkness almost alive. The whispers were louder now, echoing through the walls. They were everywhere. Lena's steps quickened, her feet carrying her down the narrow corridor without any conscious thought. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The sense of dread was overwhelming, but it was the only thing that anchored her, the only thing that reminded her she was still alive. At the end of the hallway, another door stood ajar, a sliver of dim light spilling from the crack. She didn't hesitate. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, almost suffocating, with narrow windows that barely let in any light. There were bookshelves lining the walls, cluttered with dusty volumes. The scent of old paper and mildew filled the air. But it wasn't the books that drew Lena's attention. It was a table in the center of the room. It was covered with papers, scattered haphazard, like they had been left in a hurry. Some of the pages were yellowed with age, others had strange symbols drawn across them in a jagged, hurried script. Lena reached for the nearest sheet, her hands shaking as she picked it up. The words were barely legible, the ink smeared and faded, but she could make out enough to feel her pulse quicken. The page was filled with notes, her name scrawled over and over again like a mantra. Lena Hargrove. She recoiled as her eyes caught the next line, the words sending a chill through her body. You were born here. You were meant to stay. This is where you belong. She gasped. Her heart skipped a beat. Hargrove. That name, it didn't belong to her, did it? She wasn't Hargrove. Her name was Lena Walker. She had always been Lena Walker. Or had she? The whispers were louder now, almost deafening her ears, urging her to keep reading, to understand. She turned the page, the paper crackling in her hands. The next page was a diagram, an intricate drawing of a house. But it wasn't just any house. It was the house she was standing in now. The same dark corridors, the same broken windows, the same oppressive walls. But there were strange symbols drawn across the blueprint, marking certain rooms with ominous annotations. The heart of the house, the void beneath, the unbroken circle. And then, written in a bold, frantic hand at the bottom, she is coming back. She always comes back. Lena felt her blood run cold. She was coming back. The woman, the one from the mirror. But who was she? And why had she written this? Was this some kind of warning? Or prophecy? Her head spun, the pages blurring before her eyes. She couldn't make sense of it all. She was on the verge of a memory, a truth, just out of reach, but it was slipping through her fingers like sand. The whispers were louder now, twisting and warping, calling her name from the shadows. She turned to leave the room, but something stopped her. There, in the corner of the room, beneath a pile of old papers, was something that gleamed in the dim light. A small brass key. Lena's fingers brushed against it, and the moment she touched it, a surge of energy coursed through her, sharp and electric. The key seemed to hum with an unnatural vibration, like it was connected to something deep inside the house, something ancient. She held it in her palm, her heart pounding as she turned it over. There was a symbol etched into its surface, a symbol she recognized from the drawings in the other room. It was the same symbol from the door, the one that had been burned into her mind the moment she entered the house. It was the mark of the unbroken circle. Lena didn't know what it meant, but she knew one thing. This key would open something important. But what? Her mind raced. She had to find it. She had to figure out what the key unlocked. Her eyes darted to the far corner of the room, where another door stood, almost hidden in the shadows. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to call to her. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening in her ears. You know where it is. You know what you must do. She stepped toward the door, the brass key heavy in her hand. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. She reached for the doorknob, the key fitting perfectly into the lock. With a slow, deliberate turn, the door creaked open. Beyond it, darkness stretched out into infinity, and somewhere, deep in the void, something stirred. Lena's hand shook as she held the brass key, its cold surface still humming with that strange, electric pulse. The door in front of her loomed like a black hole, swallowing the dim light of the hallway. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting, the silence pressing around her like an invisible force. Her heart thudded in her chest, its rhythm frantic, as if it, too, was afraid of what lay beyond that threshold.
With a deep, ragged breath, she stepped forward. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness. The air on the other side was thick, laden with the faint scent of mildew and decay, and a chill so intense it sent a shiver racing down her spine. She hesitated, the whispers swirling in her ears, louder now, as if the house itself was alive with the sound of 1,000 voices, all calling her name. Lena. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her with a resounding crash. The sound reverberated through the hallway, drowning out the whispers for a moment, and a wave of panic surged through her. The walls of the house seemed to close in, the air growing heavier, more suffocating. She was trapped. Her flashlight flickered, casting weak beams of light that barely cut through the suffocating dark. The room before her was cavernous, stretching out into an expanse of shadows. The air was still, the kind of stillness that made it feel like time itself had stopped. There were no windows here, no doors, only an endless void of darkness. Her mind raced as she struggled to steady her breathing. What is this place? Where am I? She reached forward, her hand trembling as she moved cautiously into the room, the light of her flashlight dancing on the walls. The stone floor beneath her feet felt cold, ancient, as if it had not been disturbed in centuries. The deeper she walked into the room, the darker it seemed to become. The shadows stretched longer, more ominous. The feeling of being watched intensified, like eyes were boring into her from the far corners of the room. And then she saw it. A figure standing in the farthest corner of the room, partially obscured by the darkness. It was a silhouette, its shape distorted by the shadows. But Lena knew, she knew, it wasn't just her mind playing tricks. This was something real, something that had been waiting for her. The whispers, too, had stopped. The silence was almost worse. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she took a hesitant step forward. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, and unnervingly still. The longer she looked at it, the more it seemed to melt into the shadows, as though it were part of the very darkness itself. Who? Lena tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't get them out. Her voice was trapped somewhere deep inside her chest, swallowed by the oppressive air around her. Then, slowly, the figure began to move. It was not a natural movement. No, it was as though the figure was gliding, floating just above the floor. The darkness around it seemed to twist, rippling like water disturbed by an unseen force. Lena's pulse quickened, terror rising in her throat like bile. The closer the figure came, the more her skin crawled, the more her mind screamed for her to turn and run. But she couldn't move. She was frozen, rooted to the spot, her feet unwilling to carry her away. The figure stopped just in front of her, so close now that Lena could feel its presence, heavy and suffocating. It was taller than any man, towering above her, its body cloaked in a swirling darkness that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Its face, if it had one, was hidden beneath a hood. But there was something more terrifying about the emptiness, the absence of any features. It felt like it had no eyes, yet it was looking at her. And then, in a voice that was not a voice, but a feeling, a scraping, gnawing sensation in the back of her skull, it spoke. "You should never have come here, Lena." The words weren't spoken out loud, but echoed inside her head, sharp and jarring. Her heart skipped a beat, her hands clammy with sweat. The name. It knew her name. "Who are you?" she managed to think, though the words felt weak, trembling on the edge of her mind. The figure's presence seemed to grow stronger, darker, the shadows thickening around it. Its voice came again, low and heavy. "I am the void, the nothingness you have ignored for so long, the darkness that has always been within you, and now you are mine." Lena felt something inside her unravel. Her pulse raced, and her vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. The air seemed to thicken around her, each breath becoming harder to take. The temperature had plummeted, the cold seeping into her bones. It felt as though the walls of the room were closing in on her, as though she were drowning in an ocean of blackness. The figure took a step closer, its presence suffocating, and Lena could feel her mind fracturing under the weight of it. The whispers started again, louder now, more insistent, pressing against her thoughts. "Remember? You remember what you've done? What have I done?" The question echoed in her mind, but it was no longer her voice asking it. It was something else, something ancient, something hungry. It clawed at her, gnawing at her sanity, begging her to remember. And then it clicked. A memory, a fragment, just a flash of something long buried. A young girl, a house, a fire. Lena's breath hitched, her chest tightening as the memory surged to the forefront of her mind. A fire. She had been there. She had caused it. The face of the woman, the one she had seen in the mirror, flashed before her eyes. It wasn't just a reflection. It was her. Lena had been the one who had set the fire, the one who had trapped her. No, no, no! The thought spiraled out of control, panic rising in her chest. She had forgotten, buried it deep inside her, but now it was back, clawing at her like a vengeful ghost. "You cannot escape it," the figure intoned, its voice sending chills through her body. "You cannot run from what you have done." Lena stumbled back, her mind racing. The fire, The woman, the house, the key. It was all connected. But how? The darkness around her shifted, and she could hear it now. The faint crackling of flames, the sound of fire licking at wood. It was all real. It was happening again. The fire was coming. And this time, Lena knew it wouldn't stop. The fire. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps as the memory of it flooded her mind. Intense, overwhelming, like a tidal wave crashing into her consciousness. The smoke, thick and choking, curling in the air. The flames, ravenous and alive, devouring everything in their path. Her hands, her burned hands, holding the matches, striking the fire, setting everything in motion. And the woman, her face twisted in agony, her hands reaching out in desperate silence as the fire consumed her. Lena. Her scream had been swallowed by the roar of the flames, but Lena had heard it. She had felt it. You remember what you did? The words reverberated in her skull, gnawing at her sanity like a relentless, insistent whisper. But even now, the full truth eluded her. She couldn't remember how, why she had set the fire. But she had. Her legs buckled beneath her as the weight of the truth crashed down on her. The floor was cold beneath her palms as she dropped to her hands and knees, gasping for air, desperate to escape the suffocating memory. The figure stood before her, unmoving, its presence heavy and suffocating. You cannot escape, the voice hissed again, this time colder, more mocking. Not from the past, not from yourself. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, her mind a whirlpool of thoughts, memories, and confusion. Why had she done it? Why had she caused the fire? Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. The darkness around her thickened, pressing against her skin, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The temperature dropped, the chill biting through her clothes. Her breath came out in a white mist, the cold seeping into her very bones. Then, without warning, the room shifted. The walls, once solid and oppressive, seemed to warp and bend, as if they were no longer part of the same reality. The floor beneath. Her feet began to tremble, and the sound of cracking wood echoed through the room. It was as if the house itself was coming alive, its form shifting and changing, growing more hostile, more alive. Lena's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. She stood up, instinctively backing away from the figure which remained still, unfathomable in its dark cloak. The floor beneath her buckled, and a low rumble began to rise from deep within the earth, vibrating through the entire room. She turned, searching desperately for a way out, but there was nothing. The door she had entered through was gone. The hallway, the stairs, all gone. The room she was in was now just an endless void of shifting shadows, collapsing and reforming as if the house itself were mutating, warping around her. Lena's eyes darted back to the figure. Do you see now, Lena? The voice came again, this time with a different tone, almost sorrowful. Do you understand what you've awakened? She shook her head, trembling. What do you mean? What is happening? The figure raised a hand, gesturing to the shifting, collapsing walls, and Lena's gaze followed its movement. The room was no longer just a room. It had become a living, breathing thing, pulsing with an energy that was old, ancient, and malevolent. This house, the figure spoke, its voice low and resonant, was built upon darkness, a darkness that was never meant to be awakened. But you, Lena, you called to it. You set it free. Lena's stomach lurched, the weight of the figure's words sinking into her very soul. I don't understand. Her voice was barely a whisper, lost in the vast, suffocating void around her. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. The figure's form seemed to shift, and for a moment, Lena thought she saw something else beneath the cloak. A face, pale and twisted, staring at her with eyes that seemed to glow with a hunger far greater than she could comprehend. You knew enough, it replied coldly. You were the one who summoned it. Suddenly, the walls stopped shifting. The air grew still once more, but the presence in the room was more oppressive than ever, suffocating, unbearable. It started with, "You, Lena," the figure whispered. "You were the key. You unlocked it. The fire. It was just the beginning." Lena took a step back, her mind reeling. The fire? The woman? She had caused all of it. But it wasn't just the fire. It was something deeper, something far darker, something that had been lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The darkness in the house, the shifting walls, the whispers. Her body shook as the realization slowly sank in. It was never just a house. It was alive. And it was calling her. It had been calling her from the moment she set foot inside, pulling her deeper into its grasp. The house. It was alive because of her. It had been waiting for her to return. She had been drawn to it for a reason. The fire didn't just consume the woman, Lena, the figure continued, its voice low and deadly. It awakened something within you, something dark, something you cannot escape. Lena felt her knees give way as the world around her spun, her vision blurred, her mind fractured under the weight of the truth. She had thought she could leave this place, that she could escape the past. But she was wrong. The house would never let her go. Her hands clutched at her head as if trying to hold herself together, but the more she tried to make sense of the memories, the more they unraveled. She had been here before, years ago as a child. She had lived in this house. She had been the one to start the fire, the one to unleash the force that now haunted every corner of it. It was always you, Lena. The whispers returned, louder than ever, swirling around her like a storm. She could feel them in her veins, in her blood. The house was calling her back, pulling her toward its dark heart. It was hungry for her. You are the house, the figure said one final time, its voice like a death knell. And it will never let you go. Lena looked up, her breath hitching, as the house around her seemed to collapse, the shadows closing in from all sides. The walls trembled, and the floor beneath her feet split open, revealing the vast, endless darkness beneath. And in that darkness, something stirred. It was waiting. Lena's head pounded, her pulse thrumming in her ears like the beat of some ancient, unholy drum. The darkness around her shifted once again, the very walls seeming to close in on her, tightening their grip like the fingers of some invisible hand. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, her chest rising and falling as if the weight of the house itself was pressing down on her. The figure, still standing in the center of the room, never moved, but Lena could feel its presence like a tangible force. It was watching her, waiting, and she knew. It wanted her to remember. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, their voices overlapping and blending together in a cacophony of dread. Lena, come back to us. You belong here. She shook her head violently, trying to shut them out, but it was impossible. The words were inside her mind, and no matter how hard she fought, they would not leave. The figure moved again, this time slowly, deliberately, gliding closer toward her. Lena's body stiffened, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape this madness, but she knew there was nowhere to go. The house was alive, and it was waiting for her to face the truth. "Who are you?" Lena whispered, her voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" The figure's voice was soft, its tone cold and detached, as though it had already won. "I am the heart of this place, Lena. The dark pulse that runs through its walls. The one you awakened. The one you cannot escape." Lena took a shaky step back, her mind struggling to process the words. She had known in some part of herself that this wasn't just a house, that this place was more than it appeared. But to hear the words spoken aloud, to have the figure confirm it, sent a chill crawling up her spine. The heart of the house. The house itself. Her hands clenched into fists, the nails digging into her palms as she tried to force herself to stay focused, to understand. What does that mean? What is this place? The figure seemed to pause, its silhouette shifting as if it was considering her question. And then, as if it were about to reveal a long-kept secret, it spoke again, its voice low and deliberate. "This house is built on suffering, on grief, on loss. It has always fed on the pain of those who dare to live here. And you, Lena, you were born from that pain." Lena's blood ran cold. She didn't understand. Her mind reeled with the weight of its words. Born from the pain? The figure gestured to the shifting, collapsing walls, its voice taking on a more sinister edge. "You think the fire was an accident, don't you? That you lost control, that you made a mistake. But no, it was fate, Lena. It was meant to happen. The fire was only the beginning. You are the catalyst. You are what feeds the house, what keeps it alive. And until you accept that, you will never escape." A sudden, sick realization hit Lena. Her legs trembled beneath her, and her heart clenched as the way Lena's breath hitched, her chest tightening as the memory surged to the forefront of her mind. A fire. She had been there. She had caused it. The face of the woman, the one she had seen in the mirror, flashed before her eyes. It wasn't just a reflection. It was her. Lena had been the one who had set the fire, the one who had trapped her. No. The thought spiraled out of control, panic rising in her chest. She had forgotten, buried it deep inside her, but now it was back, clawing at her like a vengeful ghost. "You cannot escape it," the figure intoned, its voice sending chills through her body. "You cannot run from what you have done." Lena stumbled back, her mind racing. The fire, the woman, the house, the key. It was all connected. But how? The darkness around her shifted, and she could hear it now. The faint crackling of flames, the sound of fire licking at wood. It was all real. It was happening again. The fire was coming, and this time, Lena knew it wouldn't stop. The fire. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps as the memory of it flooded her mind, intense, overwhelming, like a tidal wave crashing into her consciousness. The smoke, thick and choking, curling in the air. The flames, ravenous and alive, devouring everything in their path. Her hands, her burned hands, holding the matches, striking the fire, setting everything in motion. And the woman, her face twisted in agony, her hands reaching out in desperate silence as the fire consumed her. Lena. Her scream had been swallowed by the roar of the flames, but Lena had heard it. She had felt it. You remember what you did. The words reverberated in her skull, gnawing at her sanity like a relentless, insistent whisper. But even now, the full truth eluded her. She couldn't remember how, why, she had set the fire. But she had. Her legs buckled beneath her as the weight of the truth crashed down on her. The floor was cold beneath her palms as she dropped to her hands and knees, gasping for air, desperate to escape the suffocating memory. The figure stood before her, unmoving, its presence heavy and suffocating. You cannot escape, the voice hissed again, this time colder, more mocking. Not from the past, not from yourself. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, her mind a whirlpool of thoughts, memories, and confusion. Why had she done it? Why had she caused the fire? Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. The darkness around her thickened, pressing against her skin as if the walls themselves were closing in. The temperature dropped, the chill biting through her clothes. Her breath came out in a white mist, the cold seeping into her very bones. Then, without warning, the room shifted. The walls, once solid and oppressive, seemed to warp and bend, as if they were no longer part of the same reality. The floor beneath, her feet began to tremble, and the sound of cracking wood echoed through the room. It was as if the house itself was coming alive, its form shifting and changing, growing more hostile, more alive. Lena's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. She stood up, instinctively backing away from the figure, which remained still, unfathomable in its dark cloak. The floor beneath her buckled, and a low rumble began to rise from deep within the earth, vibrating through the entire room. She turned, searching desperately for a way out. But there was nothing. The door she had entered through was gone. The hallway, the stairs, all gone. The room she was in was now just an endless void of shifting shadows, collapsing and reforming as if the house itself were mutating, warping around her. Lena's eyes darted back to the figure. Do you see now, Lena? The voice came again, this time with a different tone, almost sorrowful. Do you understand what you've awakened? She shook her head, trembling. What do you mean? What is happening? The figure raised a hand, gesturing to the shifting, collapsing walls, and Lena's gaze followed its movement. The room was no longer just a room. It had become a living, breathing thing, pulsing with an energy that was old, ancient, and malevolent. A child, her as a child, running through a dark hallway, a door at the end, her hand reaching for the handle, a fire raging, the flames licking at the walls, swallowing the room. The woman, her mother, the one who had died in the flames, her face twisted in agony, but her eyes were pleading. Lena gasped, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps as the images burned into her mind. It was all coming back now, the truth she had buried for so long. She hadn't just caused the fire. She had killed her mother. She had set the fire that claimed her life, and the house had been waiting. It had been feeding on her pain, on the grief and guilt she had carried with her all these years. It had been growing, becoming stronger with every passing year, waiting for her to return. The fire was the price you paid, Lena, for the house, for the power, for the truth. Lena collapsed to her knees, her hands clutching her head as the weight of the revelation threatened to crush her. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. The house had been alive. It had been waiting for her to awaken it, to return to it. And now that she had, there would be no escaping. The figure loomed over her, its presence filling every inch of the room. It was the darkness, the very essence of the house. It had no face, no form, but Lena knew it had always been there. You cannot undo what has been done, the figure whispered. But you can join us. You can become one with the house. You can finally become what you were always meant to be. Lena looked up, her tear-streaked face pale and filled with horror. The whispers became louder, a storm of noise, of voices, of agony. She could hear the sounds of a fire, of burning flesh, of agony and despair. The house was calling her, and there was nowhere to run, no way out. Embrace it, Lena, the figure urged. You were born for this. Lena closed her eyes, but the darkness was already inside her. The house was inside her, and there would be no escape. The darkness that enveloped Lena was suffocating. It pressed against her skin, cold and thick, until every breath felt like a struggle to inhale life itself. The walls were no longer the walls of the house she had once known. Now they were something else, something alien, pulsating with a rhythm that was too slow, too deliberate, like the heartbeat of some ancient, slumbering beast. Lena's eyes flickered open, her body trembling with the weight of the truth she could no longer escape. The figure stood before her, its presence looming, its shape indistinct, but undeniably there, always there, watching her, waiting. Do you see now, Lena? The figure intoned, its voice soft, insidious. Do you understand your place here? The whispers came again, louder now, more frantic. The voices of the house had become one with her thoughts, as if they had woven themselves into the fabric of her mind. You are the heart of the house. You are the darkness. You can never leave. Lena closed her eyes, squeezing them shut as if she could block out the sound, the sensation, the unbearable truth that was tightening its grip around her soul. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape it. She couldn't escape herself. The fire, her mother's face, the house. It was all connected, all feeding into one unbearable, unrelenting force that was her. She had always known she was different, had always felt a strange connection to this place. But to know that the fire, the pain, the death, it had all been part of the house's design. It was too much to bear. It was never an accident, Lena, the figure said, its voice almost tender now, as if it pitied her. You are the mirror, the reflection of the darkness that resides in this place. You've always been a part of it, even before the fire, even before you were born. The room seemed to grow darker still, the shadows twisting like tendrils reaching for her, wanting to consume her entirely. Her breath hitched in her throat, the air thick with the stench of burning wood and ash, the ghostly remnants of that night years ago. But now, in the suffocating dark, something began to shift. The walls began to melt away, and the floor opened. beneath her feet as though it were part of some unholy descent. She felt herself falling, spiraling into the abyss, unable to stop it. Is this the end? A flash of light burst through the void, catching her by surprise. She was falling, but she wasn't alone. A figure, her figure, stood in front of her, bathed in an eerie, silvery light. It was her, but different. A darker version of herself, with eyes that were hollow and deep, like two pits into an endless void. The darkness of the house seemed to pulse from this other version of Lena, feeding off her pain, her guilt. Lena stopped falling, landing with a jolt on solid ground. The light flickered, illuminating the room in a faint, trembling glow. The walls were cracked, splintered like old glass. In the center of the room stood a mirror, shattered into jagged pieces, reflecting 1,000 versions of Lena's face, each one more twisted than the last. The figure before her was her reflection, her true self, the one she had hidden away for so long. The face staring back at her was not the one she had seen in the mirror for years. It was something older, something darker. The figure smiled. "Do you recognize me, Lena?" it asked, its voice smooth like silk, but there was something deadly in it. "You've always known me. I've been with you all along. I am the part of you that you've tried to forget, the part of you that feeds on the darkness." Lena's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to tear the mirror apart, but she couldn't. The reflection held her in place. It was her, yet it wasn't. It was the side of herself she had buried, the side of her that had caused the fire, the side that had torn her mother from this world. "You think you can escape me?" the dark version of Lena said, its voice low and mocking. "But you cannot. You have always been me. You always will be." Lena backed away, stumbling as her vision swam. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched one of the shards of the broken mirror. As her fingers brushed the jagged edge, pain shot up her arm, sharp and immediate. Blood dripped from her fingertips, staining the glass. The reflection in the mirror twisted, contorted, and for a moment, the shards seemed to rearrange themselves, showing glimpses of scenes long buried, her childhood, her mother. The fire, and in the center of it all, her, the girl who had set the fire, the girl who had wanted to destroy it all. Lena gasped, her heart hammering in her chest. The fire had been her choice, not an accident. The darkness inside her had driven her to it. And now, it was feeding on her regret, on her guilt, on her fear. "You are nothing without me, Lena," the reflection taunted, its smile growing wider, more twisted. "The house was built for you. The fire was your birthright. And now, it's time to embrace what you truly are." A cold laugh echoed through the room, filling every corner, every crevice. The darkness around Lena pressed tighter, the walls closing in until she felt the weight of it suffocating her. But something inside her snapped. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lena found her voice. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "I won't be a part of you. I won't let you win." The reflection's smile faltered. "You cannot fight what is inside you," it hissed. "You are me. You are the darkness." Lena took a step forward, her feet moving with newfound resolve. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, a surge of power, her power, the power of the fire, the power of the house. It was hers to command, and she wasn't going to let it destroy her. With a cry, Lena slammed her hand against the mirror. The shards shattered with a violent crash, sending the dark version of herself into a frenzy, its form splintering and breaking into thousands of pieces. For a moment, the room was still. Lena stood in the middle of the broken fragments, panting, her hands still bleeding but no longer trembling. The darkness around her seemed to hesitate, as if it were unsure of what to do next. The whispers grew faint, as if the house were waiting for her to make the final choice. Lena's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. This was her battle, and she was going to win. The silence after Lena shattered the mirror was deafening. She stood amidst the shards, her bloodied hand trembling from the effort, her mind spinning in a whirlwind of chaos. The darkness that had surrounded her seemed to retreat, pulling away from her like a retreating storm. But Lena knew it wasn't gone, not entirely. The house was still alive, still watching her. And now, the real fight had begun. She could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on her, like an invisible force trying to crush her very spirit. It was relentless, unyielding. The whispers returned, louder than ever, like 1,000 voices murmuring in the recesses of her mind. You cannot escape us, Lena. You are ours. Always have been. The floor beneath her trembled, the walls groaning in protest. The house was alive and it was angry. Lena could feel it, its fury rising like the flare of an ancient beast awakening from a long slumber. The house was fighting to keep her, to reclaim her, and she knew it would do whatever it took to keep her trapped. Lena staggered back, her hand clutching her chest as the suffocating pressure in the room increased. She felt as though the very air was thickening, wrapping around her like chains, squeezing her breath from her lungs. The shadows seemed to deepen, swirling in the corners of the room, as if the house itself were closing in on her. You cannot defeat us, Lena. You will never be free. The voice echoed in her mind, more commanding, more triumphant than before. But Lena wasn't listening to the house anymore. She wasn't going to let it control her. Not again. This is my fight now. Her breath quickened as a surge of anger burned through her. It wasn't just the house she was fighting, it was herself, the guilt, the fear, the darkness that had haunted her for so long. It had all been connected. The fire, the house, the entity, it was all part of her. But it wasn't all she was. Lena closed her eyes, her thoughts racing. She could feel the dark power that had once consumed her, the raw energy of the house pulsing beneath her skin. But now, instead of being afraid, she let it flow through her. She embraced it, the fire, the shadows, the darkness that had once sought to destroy her. Now, she was going to use it to destroy the house. The floor cracked beneath her feet, splintering like old wood as the house began to tremble in earnest. The walls started to shift again, warping and twisting as though they were made of living flesh. The house was fighting back, but this time, Lena was ready. She reached deep inside herself, drawing on the power she had always known was there, the power that the house had awakened. She felt the flames stir within her, the heat of her rage, the fire that had burned so long ago. It was still there, lying dormant, waiting to be unleashed. Her fingers tingled with energy as she raised her hand before her. The shadows recoiled, as if sensing the change in the air. Lena's breath was steady now, her mind clear. She was in control. The house had no power over her anymore. With a scream that echoed through the collapsing walls, Lena thrust her hand forward. Fire. Power. destruction. A burst of white-hot flame erupted from her palm, crashing into the nearest wall with a deafening roar. The house shuddered violently as the fire spread, devouring the darkness, consuming the very walls that had held her captive for so long. The house screamed, a terrible, anguished cry, as the flames grew, consuming the shadows, turning everything to ash. The walls buckled and twisted, groaning under the pressure of the fire, and Lena could feel the house's pulse slowing, its heartbeat faltering. The entity, the darkness that had taken root inside her, began to unravel, its power slipping away as the flames surged outward, filling every corner of the house. But as the fire spread, Lena could feel the pain of the house itself, the agony of years of suffering, of death, of everything that had brought her here. It was the house's rage, its hunger, its desperation to survive. And now, Lena was the one who held the match. She closed her eyes, her heart pounding as the heat of the flames scorched the air around her. The house was burning. The darkness was dying. And with it, the entity that had ruled her life was slipping away. But then, just as she thought she had won, something changed. The fire flickered, sputtered, and began to dim. The flames that had once surged forward now twisted and writhed in on themselves, as though the house was pulling them back, trying to extinguish them. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She reached out, trying to push the fire forward, but it wasn't enough. No, the house was fighting back. It was stronger than she had anticipated. "You cannot destroy me," the voice whispered from the walls. "I am you. I am your past, your guilt, your pain. You will never be free." Lena's hands shook as she tried to hold on to the fire, but it was slipping through her fingers, evaporating into smoke. The house was pulling everything back, its tendrils wrapping around her once again, drawing her back into its heart. The walls were closing in on her, the shadows crawling toward her, suffocating her. "This isn't over," she thought. "It can't be." She took a deep breath, her body shaking, and closed her eyes. She wasn't going to let the house win. Not this time. She reached deep inside herself, searching for the last remaining spark of power, the part of her that hadn't been consumed by the darkness, the part of her that still had a choice, and then she found it. With a fierce cry, Lena thrust her hands into the center of the room, summoning everything she had left. The fire roared back to life, hotter than ever, blazing in a brilliant, all-consuming light. The house screamed again, its walls cracking and splintering as the flames surged, burning through the very foundation of the darkness. And then, with a final deafening explosion, the house collapsed. Lena stumbled back as the room shook, the last remnants of the house crumbling to dust. The walls fell away, the shadows dissipated, and the overwhelming weight that had pressed down on her for so long vanished. She was free. For the first time in years, Lena was free. The fire faded, and the room fell silent. Lena stood amidst the wreckage of the house, her body trembling, her heart pounding. But the darkness was gone. The house had been destroyed. The entity that had held her captive had been consumed. Lena closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She had finally faced the truth. She had finally destroyed the darkness. And now, she was free. The sun had risen, but Lena didn't notice. The world outside felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. She stood alone in the ruins of the house, the remnants of the once. Imposing structure, nothing more than a pile of charred, crumbling debris. The air was thick with smoke, the remnants of the fire still lingering like a bitter memory. It was over, but Lena knew that the true battle had only just begun. The destruction of the house had not been a victory in the traditional sense. Yes, the walls had fallen, the darkness had been torn apart, but the cost had been immense. She could still hear the echoing scream of the house, the anguished cry that had resonated deep in her bones as the flames consumed it. For a moment it had felt as though the world had been torn in two. But now the silence that followed was absolute. No more whispers, no more voices in the walls, no more suffocating presence. The house was gone, and with it, the terror it had instilled in her life. Yet something lingered in the air, like a faint shadow she couldn't quite shake. Lena swallowed hard, wiping the tears that had stained her cheeks. The past few days had been a blur, a chaotic storm of fear, fire, and revelations that had ripped her life apart. She had faced the darkness within herself, confronted the very thing she feared most, her own guilt, her own inability to move on from the past. And though the house was gone, she realized with a sinking feeling that the past would never fully leave her. The fire, the one that had claimed her mother's life, had always been the scar that defined her. She had convinced herself for years that she had moved on. But deep down, she knew she hadn't. The house had been a reflection of her darkest memories, a prison that kept her locked in the guilt she carried, a guilt that was born from the fire she had set. She had buried it, hidden it away, but it had always been there, lurking in the shadows. Now, with the house reduced to ashes, Lena was forced to face the truth. She had been running from herself for so long. The sound of footsteps broke through, the silence, and Lena turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the ruins. It was Ethan, the man who had tried to help her, who had believed in her when she hadn't even believed in herself. He was standing there, his eyes filled with concern as he watched her, taking in the destruction around them. "Is it over?" he asked softly, his voice a quiet balm against the stillness. Lena nodded, though the answer felt incomplete. "It's over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as the words left her lips, she knew that she was far from free. Fire had destroyed the house, but it hadn't erased the scars. The trauma of what she had done, the grief of losing her mother, and the guilt of her role in the house's dark history, it would all remain. There would be no easy fix, no clean slate. Ethan stepped closer, his expression softening as he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to go through this alone, Lena." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with the weight of her own thoughts. The warmth of his hand was grounding, a small reminder that there was still something good in the world, something worth fighting for. "I don't know what to do now," Lena admitted, her voice cracking. "I destroyed it, but I'm still haunted by the fire, by the house, by what I did." Ethan squeezed her hand, his gaze steady. "You're not alone in this. You don't have to carry the weight of everything by yourself. You're allowed to grieve. You're allowed to feel the pain. But you don't have to let it control you." Lena closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The pain she had buried for so long was rising to the surface, threatening to overwhelm her. But Ethan's words gave her a flicker of hope, a small spark in the dark. Perhaps she didn't have to face it all alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel the grief. She had lost so much, her mother, the house, her own sense of self, but in the midst of it all, she realized that she still had the chance to rebuild. She could start again. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was still standing beside her, his presence steady, a pillar of support. "You don't have to be perfect, Lena," he said. "You just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time." Lena nodded, the first genuine smile she had managed in days flickering on her lips. It wasn't a solution, it wasn't an end, but it was a beginning, a chance to heal, to rebuild herself piece by piece. The ruins of the house behind them still smoldered, but the fire that had consumed it had begun to die, and with it, the darkness was fading, not because it had been eradicated completely, but because Lena was no longer willing to be defined by it. The house had no power over her anymore. The past had no claim on her. She was free. Lena squeezed Ethan's hand in return.
Thank you,
She whispered.
for everything.
He smiled, his eyes warm. You don't have to thank me. You've done the hardest part. She looked out over the remains of the house, the memories of all it had contained. The pain, the guilt, the terror, slowly starting to fade into the distance. It would take time. She knew that. But she was no longer trapped in the house of her past. With Ethan by her side, Lena turned away from the ruins, ready to face whatever came next. It was time to walk away from the ghosts. Time to leave them behind. The fire had taken everything, but it had also set her free. And for the first time in years, Lena felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. Thank you all for being part of this incredible event today. You've shown your support, your enthusiasm, and your passion, and now it's time to bring this auction to an unforgettable close. Every bid you've made has helped bring us one step closer to something truly special, and we're almost there. So, before we wrap up, don't miss your final chance to get your hands on those incredible items. There's still time to make your move. Whether you're bidding on that rare piece, the experience of a lifetime, or a one-of-a-kind treasure, now is the moment. The countdown is ticking down, and this is your last shot to claim what you've been eyeing. Remember, every bid counts. Every moment counts. Let's make these final minutes unforgettable. Ready? Let's go. Place those last bids, and let's make this auction a huge success for all of us. Once again, thank you all for your incredible generosity and support. The clock is ticking. Let's finish strong. Happy bidding, everyone.